All right, we're ready?
Mhm.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar focusing on financial considerations in choosing a continuing care retirement community, or CCRC. I'm Eric Meck, Managing Director of Baldwin Family Office. This is a position I've proudly held for 25 years now. As I approach my 60th birthday, I haven't given much or probably enough personal thought to today's subject matter. I'm healthy and almost bulletproof, right? Well, yeah, I heard some chuckles. My colleagues who know of some of my adventures and misadventures know otherwise. But as my mother suffered a stroke just last week, continuing care has been forced into my view as we discover that our parents are not entirely immortal, and my wife and I see the importance of having a plan in place, not only for our parents, but for ourselves. So today I'll take personal interest as we focus on fees associated with the CCRC, various terms and conditions associated with CCRC contracts, viability from both the CCRC and individual perspective, level of care guarantees and their importance. Today's presenters are Dr. Neville Strumpf and Mr. William Garrow, CPA. Dr. Strumpf is a director of Penn Nursing's Gerontology Nurse Practitioner Program and founding member of the Hartford Center of Geriatric Nursing Excellence. She also led the school as interim dean for a time. Dr. Strumpf is internationally known for her research focused on frail older adults and pioneering restraint-free care in hospitals and nursing homes. Thank you for being here with us today, Dr. Strumpf.
Thank you.
Mr. William Garrow is our second presenter. Mr. Garrow is a CPA who has operated a tax and financial consulting practice since 1999. He specialized in assisting clients with financial and long-term planning needs. He has a medical background and worked as a healthcare administrator and medical practice consultant since his graduation from the Wharton School in the 1970s. Mr. Garrow also has experience working as an EMT at an independent care facility for older individuals. Thank you, Mr. Garrow, for being with us today. So you see, we have a panel with knowledge and quite a bit of related experience in our subject matter. Now I'll turn the program over to my friend and colleague, Richard May, Managing Director of Baldwin's RKM Westchester unit. Good afternoon, Richard, and I think you'll introduce and moderate the rest of the program.
Thank you, Eric. We really appreciate you leading us off today. And I am so pleased to be able to moderate the discussion with Bill Garrow, who did appear in our first session on CCRCs. And Dr. Strumpf, Neville's not only a client and a friend, but a tremendous inspiration to many of us. And I have always said she's a great world traveler. If you had been with the Lewis and Clark expedition, half the West would have been in the country a lot earlier. But I will introduce Chrissy to give us the rules of the road and set the stage for questions later on in the presentation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christina. Just give me a second here to share my screen. I'm just going to go. Okay, so welcome to Financial Considerations in Choosing a CCRC. This is our second time talking about CCRC, and we're very excited that you're here. Just want to run through some rules of the road while we're here in our meeting. We ask if you're not a presenter and not speaking that you please keep your session on mute. This just limits background noise that may or may not interrupt with the conversation that's happening. If you have questions during the presentation, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature within Zoom. We will then select you, ask you to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question and the presenters will answer it. Once your question is answered, the host will put you back on mute. And the way that we do that is two different ways. If you're using the Zoom application, if you hover over the screen, there's a reaction button on the bottom. It may not look exactly like this, but the reaction button is there. You just click on that, and the raise your hand function, you just click on that button and it'll put you into the queue to ask a question. You do the exact same thing to lower your hand. Let's say somebody asks the same question, it's already been answered. You can go ahead and take yourself out of the queue that way. If you are joining us by phone, you can, let me go back. You can dial *9 on your phone, and that will also add you to the queue. The host will unmute you, tell you to ask your question, and then when you're finished, you just dial *9 to take yourself out of the queue again. And that is the basics. Just remember, please stay on mute unless you have a question and you're being called to ask a question. We are also monitoring the chat function. If you don't feel like verbally asking your question, you can put your question into the chat function and we will read that out loud to the presenters. And that is it. So just passing it back to you, Richard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christina. We had, as I mentioned earlier, a previous session, and Bill Garrow very kindly shared his perception of the CCRC universe. We also were very pleased to have Mike Frumer make some comments during that presentation. The feedback we got after that call was drill deeper into this topic. We really want to know more about it. And number one, Bill can provide much more detail on a financial basis, some of the financial considerations, but Neville, being a very well-respected gerontologist, can look at the other side of care within a continuing care community, the non-financial factors that we can take into account in making that decision. So we also have Joe Mudge, who's a relatively new colleague with RKM Baldwin, and Joe's going to be sharing the slides that Bill has prepared to keep us on track. I'll be probably interrupting a couple of times to direct questions from Bill to Neville or vice versa. So Joe, Bill, first of all, you have to unmute yourself or you're not, nobody's going to hear your presentation. Or Chrissy, could you unmute Bill, or do you think he's?
Bill will have to unmute himself.
Put up, Bill, Joe, if you could put up the first slide. And Bill, you're on.
Okay, I think we can go on to the next slide.
Did you want to move over? Maybe.
Okay, the goal of this presentation is, first of all, to give you some more information about what may or may not be the most important financial decision you have yet to make. It may not be the most important, but it certainly is a very important one if you are considering a continuing care community. And if you could go on to the next slide. And while you're looking over the agenda, one of the other goals of this is that after listening to this presentation, if you aren't already on a priority list or a waiting list at a continuing care community, and you have any inkling that you might ever possibly want to go
So
to
that's the big holdup right now.
Continuing a care community, please get yourself on the visitors list. Go out and do what I did at one point in time, which is I called the free lunch program, where I went and visited continuing care communities, and the ones I had some positive vibes with, I got on the waiting list. And getting on the waiting list affords you, first of all, an opportunity to go visit, kick the tires, so to speak. You can even go to spend a couple of nights and days pretending that you are, in fact, a resident. More importantly, particularly at this point in time, it gets you onto the priority list. Unlike the 2008s, where people couldn't sell their homes in order to get on a priority list, And then we had COVID where people didn't want to go, and people were going through their CCRCs were going through their priority list by dozens of people. We're now back in an environment which is totally different, where sometimes people are having to wait 2 or 3 years or more in order to get the type of unit that they desire. Next slide, please. While you read this, let me just make a couple of comments. First of all, this is a confusing area, and the slides reflect the fact that there are 3 basic contracts. There's an A contract, which is a contract which essentially you're paying one fee whether you're in independent living or in skilled nursing. The advantage of doing that is that particularly if you don't have a long-term care policy, your care will be covered at the same cost that you're paying in independent living. That being said, of course, the costs are going to go up, and that's just a sort of a fact of life. There's a B contract, which if you're fortunate to have long-term care insurance, may be more appealing because it's less costly. It offers some of the same advantages that a contract does, in that you're in the same place, whether or not you're in independent living or if you're in skilled nursing. And however, you will be paying a greater cost than you would have been paying if you were in the A contract category. However, you've got the guarantee that the care that you need will be available. And then there's a C contract that is sort of pay as you go. It may be in a facility which does not offer you care in the same site, or may not even offer you care in any other location. So you're sort of out on your own if you need skilled nursing. And just a couple more comments before we move on is that unlike supplemental Medicare plans, where the government has specified different types of contracts and the services being offered, even though they're similar services in continuing care retirement communities, each one has a different contract. There may be a lot of similarities, and some of these contracts, if you want to pay a greater entrance fee or pay greater fees while you're there, have a refundable entrance fee. However, as I think we commented last time, this is somewhat of a misnomer, because you become an unsecured creditor of the facility, and whether or not they will or be able to refund your contract that you've paid more for in order to get a refund for your state, or in case you wanted to leave, that's somewhat problematical. I'm not going to go into that at this point particularly.
Bill, can I interrupt you just to ask Neville to comment on a couple of non-financial things, just give you a break?
I was hoping you would, Richard.
Thank you, Bill. Joe, you could take the slides down for a second so we can see Neville. I guess by unsharing the screen. There you go. Neville, I was going to ask not only to give Bill a break and also to have a second voice to resonate with our crowd. Can you describe some of the non-financial factors that go into anyone's decision of what kind of CCRC they might be interested in contracting with, and also what if you can maybe elaborate on these different levels of care that Bill's talking about, the assisted living versus the personal care, memory care, and then skilled nursing.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that, Richard. Let me start by maybe just amending the introduction of myself slightly, and that's to say that I am a retired professor of nursing from the University of Pennsylvania, although I did do all the things that at one point in my life that were alluded to. And in that long career at Penn as a gerontology nurse and director of a nurse practitioner program in a research center, I did spend a lot of time in retirement communities, in part because they often served as clinical placements for my graduate students, as well as clinical sites for some of the research that I was doing. And I served on the board of a Quaker life care community for 30 years, have many friends who live in life care communities. So I've had a lot of exposure to these communities, and I actually am on a priority list at one particular community, although I'm resisting a little bit leaving my Center City apartment. We can deal with talking about that later. What I have learned about, among many things about retirement communities, is that if you can afford a community, and clearly that's a priority, I personally feel, this is whether I go to one or not, that there is probably no better, safer, or higher quality of way to assure that you will have excellent care in a beautiful setting with exquisite clinical attention to your needs than in a CCRC. So I think very highly of the model. It is an expensive model. It's a model that's not available to large swaths of our population, but what it offers in terms of guaranteed caring, and I would put the emphasis on caring, is really important. It was always very interesting to me that when I spent time at CCRCs and would talk to people who were visiting, is that one of the places they never looked at was the healthcare center or even paid much attention. It was as if one friend of mine who lived in a community said that people come here thinking it's a cruise ship to eternity. And on some levels it is, but in my view, the very most important reason to move to a CCRC is the guaranteed health care. I think all of us have spent enough time dealing with the healthcare system, even if have privileged access and good insurance, that healthcare systems and services are anything but seamless, anything but organized, and that there could be a lot of discontinuity related to the delivery of care. And one of the finest things that a CCRC does is eliminate most of that, because there's a director of healthcare services, there's a medical director, almost always geriatric trained, and certainly in the best CCRCs, there are one or more geriatric nurse practitioners who are overseeing the healthcare. So you can't really get much better than that if you're looking at your overall package of health. To go more directly to elaborate on what Bill said and Richard's question about levels of care, there's sort of a traditional way that healthcare is delivered in the majority of CCRCs. A certain amount of care, if it's very short term, might actually be care that takes place in the apartment where you live, your primary residence, but that won't usually be on any long-term kind of basis. And then the levels of care include something known as personal care, which tends to be for individuals who remain fairly mobile, fairly capable in their basic activities of daily living in terms of dressing, eating, managing in their apartment, but it provides supervision, meals, medication checks, keeping a solid eye out for what you're doing and where you're going. And then what's known as skilled care is usually for individuals who become quite dependent because of a very impaired mobility, very impaired cognition, or a range of other complex physical health problems that really can only be managed with more intensive skilled nursing care. There's been an interesting movement going on in continuing care retirement communities, and that's to limit the number of beds that are actually in skilled care and expand our ideas of personal care or even home-based care. I think that's part of a movement that is recognizing that people want to be as much as possible in an individualized care, personalized care environment. They don't want the feeling they're confined in a nursing home kind of environment. So that's shifting a little bit, but traditionally the healthcare is delivered in one of three ways: totally independent in the apartment, personal care for the fairly active and mobile, maybe a little confused, maybe needs a walker, whatever. And then the care for the most disabled. I think a couple things I would say about the healthcare is it's comprehensive care, which is something really lacking in our healthcare system. You can keep your own doctors, you can do, you can see your own specialists, you can make any of those kinds of choices yourself. But the fact that there is a geriatric physician who's a medical director and ideally nurse practitioners on site gives you a level of access to surveillance, observation, rapid intervention, prevention, health promotion, et cetera, that I think is very important. So I would say, along with meeting and determining all your financial ups and downs, that one of the things you would most want to look at is what is the quality of nursing care and health care in this community. And by that, I also mean all of the ranges of therapies: physical therapy, speech therapy, dental care, certainly the best of the continuing care retirement communities make all of those things available to their residents. Does that give a start, Rick?
Yeah, that's a great summary. Thank you, Neville, very much. I do like the cruise ship to eternity, and you wonder how much does something like that cost? So back to Bill Garrow to tell us how much that cruise ship to eternity does cost.
Okay, Joe, if we could get up slide 5 here, and I'm not going to read the slide. I am going to.
One more beyond that, Joe. There we go.
Okay.
Whoops. Back. There we go. Right. You got it. But there's a lag there, obviously.
Okay. I'm not going to read the slide for you, but I am going to comment that although the monthly fee, according to this slide, is $3,300, I'm on waiting lists in Philadelphia area with CCRCs that are double that amount. And I'm on one in Michigan, which is almost half that amount. So that in considering costs, it's informative to determine, it's also informative to make sure that if you have any idea to move to a different location, to check out the costs, since they can vary widely. Also, in considering the costs, it's informative to determine how much you are currently paying for housing. Most of the marketing material for each of the one has something in there that allows you to compare what you're currently paying to what you won't be paying once you go to a CCRC. And I calculated that I'm currently paying close to $40,000 to live where I'm living without any consideration for major repairs and improvement. And that's not even with getting into the nuances of meal plans, which usually cover at least one main meal a day. And that can be a whole subject unto itself, but I'll not go there. Just before I go on to the next slide, just a comment that I made earlier. you will have to expect at least a 3 to 5% increase in these costs. You're talking about healthcare costs, and they seem to have a way of only going up. So if we could go on to the next slide, entrance fees. And I've touched on this earlier, but I think there are a couple important points here. The fees will vary based on the size of the unit that you and your partner select, and entry fees are greater for couples, but they certainly aren't double what they would be for a single person. And also, the entrance fees vary by type of contract, with, of course, the A contracts costing more with the entrance fee, and the C contracts may not even have an entrance fee associated with them. And as I commented earlier, some of these fees are 50 to 100% refundable. And I've also commented on some of the risk of whether or not they will ultimately be refundable. I think the important point for anyone is that they do offer almost 90% refundability usually if you decide for whatever reason that you want to move out, so to speak, within the first 6 to 12 months. After that, that grace period, their fees are amortized about, often 2% per month, so that after 25 months, 2%, half the entrance fee is now non-refundable. And then after close to 4 years, essentially, you've lost the so to speak the entrance fee. And of course, it's important that again, the emphasis is to make sure that you really think you'll have a good fit with the community. And the only way to do that is not only to visit once, but revisit on repeated occasions. And for example, last week I was at a crafts fair at one continuing care community, and tonight I'm going to go have dinner with 5 residents and hear a program on Andrew Wyeth at another one. So the next slide, please. Can you afford a CCRC? Well, that depends, but it's important to note that, as I said, you're already paying a certain amount for housing, and that the community itself will ask you for financial information. And I have been told by certain communities exactly what sort of housing I can afford based on their review of my financials. And we'll cover shortly some of the issues involved with you assessing their financial health. So if we can move on to the next slide. This may be getting into the weeds a little bit, but in looking at the financial implications of a CCRC, it's interesting to note that the A contracts have a larger portion of their fees allocated to healthcare, because you're essentially prepaying or paying for a long-term care policy, whereas the B contracts have a lower allocation, and usually the C contracts have nominal. And when I'm talking about the percentage amounts, with the A contracts, it can be as high as 40%, and with the B contracts, 20% is a healthcare deduction, and in turn, that becomes an issue with you and your accountant, because whether or not they're actually deductible depends on the extent to which the healthcare expenses exceed your adjusted gross income, and then combine that with your charitable expenses. And if you happen to have some real estate taxes that from another property, that also becomes deductible along with your charitable contributions. And under the current tax laws, the standard deduction has been raised such that a lot of clients don't even qualify for as couples anymore, but they may very well have substantial healthcare costs that will qualify, particularly during the first year of occupancy, where a substantial portion of that entrance fee becomes deductible. Okay, now on to the next slide, judging the financial health. I think we're one more. This is an extremely complicated area, and many people erroneously think that their entry fee and monthly fees they're paying a CCRC are comparable in risk to putting money into a bank or an insurance policy. Unfortunately, this really isn't so. There's no government insurance program such as FDIC for CCRCs, nor is there any industry-wide consortium that helps financially impaired CCRCs meet their obligations, such as mainstream insurance industry has. Rather, the analogy is you're not putting your money in a bank or investing in an insurance policy. Paying CCRCs is comparable to investing in a very small business firm, which is really too insignificant to attract attention of analysts, brokers, or rating agencies. And therefore, as a person going into a CCRC, it becomes incumbent upon you and your advisors to assess, to the extent you can, the financial viability of the organization. And I'll try to spend a few minutes on that while essentially saying that this could be a semester graduate course in terms of understanding the finances of a CCRC. The assessing the strength means gathering information about the recent history of, you can do this from the audit statements or the net asset balances. Even though a lot of people don't say they're numbers people, these reports also have considerable texts which you can read and which will provide you with some information. And then, of course, there's researching the recent occupancy rates. Normally, you want to see a CCRC that has at least a history of, perhaps not during COVID, but now at least 90% occupancy. And the better facilities now essentially have 100% occupancy. And their units are fully occupied except for those that they're rehabbing for residents that have been offered an apartment. So you might also on your tour be looking at how up to date, if there's certainly it becomes obvious if there's a lot of deferred maintenance, and if also whether they're in fact they're things that are really very nice, and even more of some of these facilities are even getting into geothermal heating and using panels on the roofs to generate electricity. There's such a thing as an actuarial report, which again, if a facility refuses to give it to you or says they don't do actuarial reports, I tend to stay away from them. There's also, if they've got public debt, there's rating by bond agencies to the extent they're useful. In general, one should do as much due diligence as they can, and if they're willing and able, they should rely on someone that's more familiar with CCRCs, whether that's now a healthcare law attorney or someone such as myself and Richard, who regularly have clients in these facilities.
Bill, is that a good time to take a break?
Yes.
Okay, because I have some questions about some history that goes with some of the facilities that have had some financial difficulties in the past.
Please.
Neville, I was going to ask you if you could address some of the particular issues that are involved in gerontology today that pertain to CCRCs, is not only medical care, but also some of the behavioral aspects of dealing with people in CCRC, the residents, as well as psychological. Obviously, it's not all medical at this point.
No, it's not all medical. And of course, that the question that you've just asked is, you know, a whole curriculum for nurse practitioners or geriatric specialists. But in any event, I guess, you know, I would say something very kind of almost simple-minded, except that I'm constantly aware of it as I get older. You can't avoid having stuff happen to you as you get older. And I sometimes joke that I spent my whole life teaching geriatrics, and now I am geriatric. And it's sometimes a bit shocking to confront all of the aspects that one can get into in terms of the arthritic changes or hearing or visual changes or just changes in mobility or energy or fatigue or memory or whatever. So these are places, CCRCs are highly attuned to the aging experience, but I would say their number one priority, and it's certainly a financial incentive for them as well, to keep people as healthy as possible. I mean, the whole point really of the CCRC, if you want to look at the financial part, is to keep residents active and in their apartments, because it's much cheaper to take care of people when they're at home than if they're requiring the more intensive resources that would be utilized by a personal care unit or a memory care unit or a skilled unit. And remind me, Richard, just to come back to memory care when I kind of finish this other, you know, answer to your question. So the communities are by and large very oriented toward health promotion, disease prevention, and fitness. And all of your good communities will have fitness centers, gyms, swimming pools, bocce courts, you know, you name it. So the emphasis is clearly on physical health. Likewise, mental health and what we might say psychosocial health is very well recognized and appreciated from the standpoint that people need activities, they need social interaction, not forced upon them, but available. I hope that background phone stops ringing in a second. It will, because I don't really quite know what to do with it. But anyway, I think another great aspect of the CCRC is the opportunity for social interaction, social experiences. You don't have to engage in activities or groups, but the opportunity to dine with other people, to engage in hobbies that you might share, or to volunteer. Many of the communities have strong volunteer programs, and I think most of us know continuing to be purposeful in one's life is very important as well. Probably most of you, many of us are fortunate not to be isolated, lonely, depressed, etc. But those are realities for people who get older, even people who may be more affluent. And I think CCRCs as well are very well designed to and equipped to help people deal with some of the issues that do occur with aging and loss, whether it's depression, anxiety, etc. In many cases, we can't always avoid that. So they're almost, well, again, all of the good facilities, that would be something to ask about, whether psychosocial support, social work support, geriatric, psychiatric support is also available. I mean, these are also part of the realities of getting older. But I think one thing that people fear about a CCRC is that somehow it equals what our stereotype of a nursing home is. And when you visit a CCRC, it does not feel like that at all. These are very active, very vibrant places, but they also have units or wings or sections that are devoted to individuals who need greater support. And again, as I said before, I would strongly emphasize anyone visiting a community to assure themselves that there's a very high quality, well-staffed health component that's very attuned to individual needs, to the dignity of the resident, to independent choice. All of that is, definitely very important. And the degree to which individuals in the health centers are integrated into the larger community as opposed to being isolated from it. So those would be some of my comments, Richard, to your question about what's the big picture of medical, behavioral, psychological, psychosocial.
I'm sorry, you said you wanted me to remind you about memory care.
Yeah, and I was just going to come to that. When I was talking about the typical levels of care, personal and skilled, some communities will have actually a separate memory unit for individuals with increasing confusion. My personal opinion is I'm not crazy about that as a separate unit. I think people do better integrated into a normal environment as much as possible, and an environment where they can still easily engage with the larger community. But you may in your travels see segregation of people with memory impairment in a memory unit. As I said, I guess there could be reasons why communities choose that model from a progressive modernist idea of what healthcare should look like as we get older. I'm not in favor of that, but anyway, I throw it out there. So yeah. People with memory problems, and that's a big issue. There's a large proportion. If we live long enough, I think the statistic, if you manage to get to about 85 years old, about 20% of the population is likely to have some memory impairment. So you can't take away the importance of knowing how a community handles that change in a person in terms of decision making about what kind of unit they're going to be in, etc. I guess that would be my other big thing about the healthcare, would be to ask the question about how the community works with the resident and making decisions about levels of care, because it clearly needs to be a shared decision, not something that's imposed on you.
Thank you. That's very, very informative. Just a question to both of you before we go back to the financial. A lot of communities have not only the financial testing, but also cognitive testing before you're actually admitted to the CCRC. Is that pretty common? And is that purely just subjective as far as somebody passing a cognitive test, or is there some recognized cognitive test that is used fairly uniformly?
I did do a little bit of quick research on this, Richard, knowing that you might ask, or somebody might ask that question. It varies from community to community, but the majority of communities will probably want to do at least a very basic cognitive screen. There are a number of very common, fairly quick tests that ask a bunch of questions about, memory as it's related to remembering words for 10 minutes and asking you 10 minutes later, or counting backwards, or, other orientating kinds of information. So it's not uncommon for a basic cognitive screen. And the other thing that there'll be some attention probably paid, not too much, but just what degree of mobility you have. I mean, the ideal situation is that you can be independent in your own apartment. So the degree of mobility is important. But again, and I'm sure Bill has learned this from going to many different facilities, that's going to vary a little bit. Once upon a time, some facilities simply wouldn't take you if you had a history, let's say, of a stroke, or you already had an advanced cancer or whatever. That's not, for the most part, as important as being mobile and reasonably cognitively intact at the time of admission. So that's probably some kind of basic screens around health, but the majority are not doing an in-depth kind of evaluation where you're sort of in or out based,
Thank you. One of the participants asked a question, but before we get to the questions, I wanted to ask Bill a little bit about the follow-up on this financial health of the CCRC. Back in 2009, a very prominent national organization, Erickson Retirement Communities, actually went through a bankruptcy. Part of the reason, at least from what I've read, was they're giving the new residents the option to sell the house in anticipation of moving into the facility, was thwarted by the 2008-2009 real estate crisis, where nobody was able to sell homes because nobody could get mortgages, et cetera. That was only a 6-month event. They went through the bankruptcy, were acquired by I think a venture capital firm, and then reopened, and they're back healthy as can be with communities throughout much of the eastern half of the United States. Do you have any sense of how fragile some of these CCRCs are, Bill, as far as the next financial crisis or the next pandemic or whatever it might be?
Historically, very few of them have experienced what you're talking about with Erickson. That's why it's problematical, and it's an investment that has a certain degree of risk to it, particularly given that it's hard enough to assess an organization's financial health today, much less how is it going to be 5-10 years when I in fact need a higher level of care, and will they have the resources to provide the staffing to provide me with that care?
I don't even know how you can really get. Let me give you another example that's local for Pennsylvania. Kendall Crosslands is a retirement community in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, and in 2023 they decided to leave the Kendall group of homes to go it on their own. Mm-hmm. And that seems like a dramatic event. Kendall has probably 20 retirement communities around the country, and they've left that mothership. I don't even know how to interpret that, and I wouldn't even know how to go about to get information on what it means. Any thoughts on that kind of big picture?
I can only speculate that there are advantages and disadvantages of being involved with a larger community. There's the fact that an organization is related to a church might have absolutely, the church isn't about ready to bail, the denomination isn't about ready to bail out a particular continuing care retirement community because they're affiliated with that particular denomination.
Wow. Neville, do you have any observations on that?
Yeah, I don't know the level of financial aspects of this, but I do know about the Kendall Corporation because I worked very closely with them when we dreamed, which didn't come true, of creating a Kendall at Penn, which the idea completely fell apart with the pandemic. But what I understand from some of the higher level executives who worked at Kendall, that Kendall was among the very first CCRCs in the country, and was a real pioneering model in Philadelphia area, and became kind of a mothership for launching and supporting other communities around the country. And I think, I guess as a form of governance, you might, think of it a little bit like a republic, like states and the federal government. It kind of reached a point, hopefully that I'm not making any predictions about our own country, but it kind of reached a point where this federalist model didn't really provide much for the members. And I think the conclusion was, as an idea in terms of financial and quality of care, and it didn't make much sense anymore. I mean, they were all Quaker communities. They were all operating with the same set of values. They all, were doing pretty well financially on their own, and there wasn't much reason to be paying the mothership for some kind of leadership and guidance, so they got out of it. And I guess it partly exists, but there are far fewer members in the Kendall group now than there were a few years ago.
Interesting. So maybe some others have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Joe, do you have access to the questions that have been coming in? I have a couple that came in before the event, but shall we give priority to the ones that are come in today?
Yeah, I have a question in the chat. This is from Howard Sunwall. Would you define what you mean by financial testing? Is that to determine that the incoming resident can continue to afford the costs?
Bill?
Let me attempt to understand the question in that the for-profit communities, I've had a client that was in a for-profit community and they ran out of money and they had to leave, and they ended up in a lesser level of care Medicaid facility. On the other hand, the nonprofits tend to have the reputation that they do fundraising, they accept donations, they intentionally ask for legacy gifts to support funding that will enable residents who essentially outlive their assets to remain in the community. They may not be able to stay in exactly the same accommodations, but they're able to remain in the community.
And that's actually a wonderful question to ask when one is visiting a community. What happens if someone does run out of money? I certainly agree with Bill, and I know of several not-for-profit Quaker communities, all of which have resident funds that have been accumulated over the years, mostly from gifts by other residents, leave some kind of a gift in their will. There's also fundraising, to support those funds. And certainly some of the communities I'm aware of, they would do almost anything to not ask someone to leave. But that's a really, really important question to ask when one is looking at a CCRC. What happens? You just manage to outlive your assets. I mean, one of the interesting demographics about life care communities is people live forever in that. It's nothing to have lots of residents over 90 or even 100, because you're in a very supportive, safe environment with lots of activities, lots of opportunities to promote your health, good health care, good food. People live forever in these places.
Howard, who asked that question, is asked if he could clarify the question or make a statement. Joe, can you unmute Howard?
I am unmuted.
Oh, terrific. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I don't think you really really answered the question. The question was, Bill had mentioned before that part of the intake process or application process for a prospective resident would be that the CCRC would do a financial review of that person's income and assets and so on in order to qualify them. That was the word you used. Is the qualification supposedly, from what I understand, that the person can afford on an ongoing basis for the rest of their life, so to speak, to be able to afford the fees? Is that what we're talking about in terms of qualifying?
I would say, again, it depends facility to facility. I suspect, look at your current age, and they have some estimate of what the average of their people in their community live to, and to the extent that they're able to offer discounts to care that people that clearly don't have the resources to outlive their assets, they will in turn make, I'm aware of a community or two that will in fact admit somebody based on who they are and their life story, and not expect them to pay the full fare.
Yeah, Howard, I have a simpler answer to your question. It's probably yes.
Okay. That's what they're determining. So if you have the assets, if you can say, here's my income, here's the assets I have that I can draw upon, that you will then qualify under their view.
Yes, I've been told exactly what size unit I can afford and not bigger.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Exactly. Joe, other questions?
Yes, Alan wants to know what, if any, about any hidden fees one might encounter with CCRCs.
That was what percentage increase?
No. What other hidden fees?
Yeah, what
Okay.
if any hidden fees a prospective client might, or a resident might encounter with CCRCs?
That's again, it depends, but an answer might be that make sure that you read the contract to see what is in fact included and not included. The fact that it currently is included doesn't necessarily mean that it'll always be included. A simple example might be, we'll give you a free ride to doctors, and given the cost of gas and the cost of transportation, we're now going to put a fee on that. And the contracts allow facilities to change with due notice of, what they're charging for particular fees. Clearly, the type A contract is likely to have fewer surprises than a type B or a type C contract where it's pay as you go.
And I've seen listings for expenses from clients who've been in CCRCs where it will list the monthly fee and then monthly haircut for the husband and a monthly salon appointment for the wife. As simple as that. But
An
that's
assessment for the pet.
nothing for the pet. Yeah, and an assessment for the pet. You're right. And those are pretty steep, actually. And they have definite types of pets. You're not going to be able to bring your pit bull into your CCRC.
Well, I do want to say, well, pets is actually a very important thing. Pretty much, I think most CCRCs allow you to bring the pets that you currently have, because clearly there are very few people who are going to move anywhere and have to put their pet down or find a new home for it. But you might want to ask whether you can get another pet. And it would probably be very important to ask whether you can have a pet if you find that you need to be living in personal care or skilled care. I've seen the whole range on that too. Certainly I'm mostly familiar with the not-for-profit Quaker facilities, of which there are many in the Philadelphia area. And they're pretty generous when it comes to pets. When I first went on the priority list, I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but I did have 6 cats at the time. And so I asked about that. They said, well, that was really a lot of animals. And I think they were very hopeful that some of them would die before I moved. But they did say, well, we try our best to allow people to bring their current pets.
Let me pose another question that came in advance of the call from Wendy Curo. And I think a lot of people might have heard about this, but we might have people that be interested. There's something called a placeholder option in which a person can prepay the deposit for the least expensive space in a CCRC and not actually even move into it, just literally hold the space until they're ready to accept whatever more spacious place that becomes available. Do you have any either personal experience or any thoughts on that? Either of you?
Well, I would say, again, it depends on the facility. And I know one facility, for example, that previously they offered me a place and I wasn't ready to go. And now, in order to offer me the place, I have to qualify from a healthcare standpoint. And in thinking about that question, I have to wonder whether that might be one of their ways of just discouraging placeholder type arrangements.
Interesting.
Have another question on entrance fees. On entrance fees, are they typically returned to your estate upon your passing? Some are, I have heard. Is it common or does it vary widely?
Well, it certainly varies by how long you've been there. And if you were unfortunately to die within 6 months, it would be largely refundable. If you were there longer than 4 years, if it was a non-refundable fee, you would lose most of it, if not all of it. And if it was a refundable fee, it would be up to the facility as to when and how much of that they would refund.
Thank you. Okay. Mike Frumer added a comment, a significant hidden fee can be additional care by aides. I'm not sure if it's a question, but I assume that's a correct assumption.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good to see you back.
Hello. Yeah, we've found some people. It's apparently not terribly unusual for someone to be in personal care or to be in nursing care or anywhere and not be getting the kind of care they think they ought to get, like in personal care, and they need to be helped to a bathroom, and they really don't think they should have to wait for half an hour for that. And the family can end up paying for 24/7 care to make sure that they don't have to wait. So
I just saw that. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. We're at an hour and 5 minutes, so there some of these people, some of our guests are probably allowed an hour for the call, and I know our participants probably counted on an hour for the call as well. I did also. So I'm unless there's another final observation in this, what I do want to say is that Baldwin will continue to offer these kind of calls. This is also recorded, so we will have this on our website within a couple of days. And the question was just asked, can we get Bill's slides? Yes, Bill Bill's slides will be also available on our website, probably at the same time as the recording of the call. So we want to thank Dr. Strump and Mr. Garrow for participating today. And thank you all of you for joining us. We really appreciate your interest in both the family office calls and the Baldwin investment calls. So we'll keep them coming, and I hope you all will be here for our next call.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bring us home, Joe.